Hi everyone. Guess what? It's Friday. Quite cloudy outside today. As normal, I've forgotten to get my coffee, so I don't know why we called these coffee and chat because I very rarely have a coffee with me. I'm really glad to welcome today Grant Hayward, who is from an amazing organisation and frankly one of the leading lights in Oxfordshire, which is the county where we are, on all things social value and the purpose of power. If I want to talk anything about social value, then Grant is my go-to. He's introduced me to more social value enterprises and social enterprises than anybody else that I know. And absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, a specialist in this area. He's going to deny it completely. So I'm really glad to welcome Grant. We are both members of a networking group that's called B4, and that's one of the premier networking groups in Oxfordshire, which obviously we're both very proud of, Oxfordshire being a great county to work in the United Kingdom. So we wanted to talk today about this thing called the purpose of power. I know, Grant, because I've seen an awful lot about it, and we just started talking before we got into the session then, that you've actually had a week on this week. So what's the purpose of power? What's this week been about?
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, I don't want to criticize, but I think it's the wrong way around. It should be the power of purpose, really. That's what we should be calling it. Yeah, so really this week, perhaps we'll talk a little bit more detail about the sorts of things that I do. But in general, just as a synopsis for this week, it's really a celebration of, I suppose, business as a force for good and the ways in which enterprise can really have a positive social and environmental impact on the world.
So you also did B Corp. You had a B Corp event this week as well, didn't you? Was that part of this purpose?
It was,
power of
yeah.
Purpose?
It's probably what might be worth doing, Kath, is that you mentioned my business. So my business is Air Collaborant. To be honest, I don't use the brand name very much, really. I suppose I just sort of, well, you've seen me, I just mix in this space, wearing a number of different hats. But one of the hats I wear is with a social enterprise called OSEP, that's OSEP. And that was originally founded as an informal network, actually initiated from both universities coming together. But that was all around the universities wanting to push out into the wider community support for social enterprise and social entrepreneurship. Now that actually formed as a social enterprise just over a year and a half ago, called OSEP Kick. And it's delivering a support program for the LEP actually around this whole space. So anyone interested in this space that would like some support can talk to us through that. But as part of that, OSEP curated a week's worth of events. Some of those events fit with that support program, but others we just welcome people. And this as well, funny enough, we've been advertising this as part of that week as well, so we can talk about this topic. But you're right, yesterday there was a B Corp event. We've launched locally a B Local, so one of the first groups of B Corps and B leaders in Oxfordshire. I'm talking too much, over to you.
So let's just wind back a tiny bit.
Yeah.
So tell people that are listening what is a social enterprise, because there will be a whole host of people that just don't even know what that term means.
Really good question, and I have to say there's people that misunderstand it still, and it's a challenge. So we tend to work with, there's an organisation in the UK called Social Enterprise UK, and we use their definition. Now, you can be a number of different types of legal entities. So technically you could be a charity and a social enterprise. You can be a private business and a social enterprise. But there are a couple of key elements. If you want, I won't give you every detail, but the principle, if you want to see more, you can look at the Social Enterprise UK website. But in principle, it's established for a social or environmental purpose. Importantly, that needs to be embedded within the, whatever it might be, the articles of the association or the objects or something like that. And significantly, you need to be investing at least 50% of your profits back into the organisation, and also not be generating more than 50% in income. So in other words, a charity that did a little bit of trading might not necessarily qualify. But importantly, yeah, it's largely got an asset lock. So I suppose the difference between that and a purposeful business, which we might want to talk about, is that there is a mission lock effectively generally that keeps the funds within the organisation. So if you and me set up a social enterprise, a Kick, and we did really well and it was worth £1 million, we wouldn't be selling it off and earning that back, we'd be passing it on to somebody else.
Okay, so again, rewind, what's a B Corp?
Yeah, great. So B Corp is a movement that come out of the States. Actually, it started really interesting. So 3 fellas went to uni in Stanford or one of those, set up what over there they call a sports apparel business, with a lot of this stuff embedded right at the heart of what it did. They were really successful, grew it, sold it, and literally within a year, the people that bought it ripped the heart out of it. So the founders felt that they should do something about it. And actually over in the States, there is a legal entity now, like we might have a limited company, there's a legal entity called a B Corp, and they're talking about doing that here. So in simple terms, we're talking about private businesses. Not for profits won't be included. You can be a social enterprise, but private businesses that actually recognize that they put, I mean, as we all know, those listening will know, as directors of business, we are legally responsible to the shareholders of the business. But what B Corps do is say, as well as our legal responsibility to the shareholders, we place on an equal footing all other stakeholders. So whether that's employees, whether it's the people that we trade with up and down the supply chain, whether it's the local community, and articles of association are changed to reflect that. So people are very transparent, and they're there to be questioned over it as well. So yeah, and very quickly, you have to go through a process. It's a free online assessment tool. You look at a number of different areas of your business and you reach a score. Once you reach a score, you then are verified, externally verified.
So you mentioned in one of the parts of the explanation then that it's not just social value, it's also potentially sustainability and environmental. What's the connection? I mean, do they have to be both? Do they have to be all three, or can they be one or the other?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So when you go through this assessment, there are technically 4 pillars. So they use different words. I'll keep it to the UK really, but generally it's about the way the impact on the environment, the way it engages with community and supports community. I call it supply chain, but the way you're trading. The workforce, importantly, are not just about the way you're looking after the workforce, but even perhaps the say that the workforce has, perhaps in the way the business is run. So they're the sort of key elements, and there's 2 sort of streams. One is around the operational impact, and the other is the sort of impact of the the reason that the business exists. So as you're operating, you're going to have a positive and negative impact, but also in terms of what it's doing. So if it's an environmental business as well, it could have some very positive. So all of those elements are looked at.
So a company such as, I mean, let's use a well-known UK company, John Lewis, for example, would they, they obviously, because of the way that they have set their business up, their employees have very much a say in how the business is run. Would that be part of the way into being a B Corp?
It's interesting, actually. John Lewis is one. I mean, I wouldn't know exactly what their legal entity is, but I think perhaps to answer your question in a slightly different way, if you take Unilever, for example, because of the structure of Unilever and the shareholding, that can't be a B Corp for various reasons. But what they are doing is buying up B Corps. So Ben & Jerry's ice cream is a B Corp. They're part of Unilever, and they really are pushing the agenda quite strongly. So certainly a partnership like John Lewis is doing some very positive stuff anyway. I mean, it's yeah.
Okay. So what sort of things have you guys been up to this week? I know that we've mentioned one of the events, but I know you seem to have been busy all week. So what types of things have been happening?
It's been great. So through this business support program, I won't go into too much detail, but we have a number of what we call social enterprise hubs around the county in Oxfordshire here. So one of those is Tap Social, for instance. So
tell everybody about Tap Social. It's one of my favourite places.
Good example. So they're a local business here in Oxfordshire. They have a place in Botley. They're just about to open another place in Oxford. But again, the principle of that organisation, it's a fantastic venue for social, gatherings. They have great music, great vibes. But what they also do, importantly, is they work with offenders and ex-offenders to get them back into work, really, and they use training through that, sort of brewing beer, really, as their expertise. And what's also good about it is the people that run it, they're from that sort of social justice background. So Paul Humferson, one of the founders, is actually a barrister, and I think he was getting frustrated with keep on pushing them through the system and back out again, and thinking we need to do something else.
So but we had broke the system at the other end. Yeah,
exactly.
Fabulous.
So they're using their great products, great brand to be able to bring these things to the fore. And we had so last night we had a social. It was one of these, a video chat tasted some beer, and had a quiz as well. Yes, very good.
Oh, fabulous.
That's just
Fabulous.
one of the many events.
Now there's some type of farm that we've discussed before. Are the farmyards or farms that are involved in this?
Not so much in this. I think you and I might have talked about. Would that be farmability? I don't know.
I think it was. Yes.
Yeah. So there's a great charity, Farmability. I mean, they're not necessarily involved in this, but it's a good example of the way in which businesses can engage in ways other than, I think that one of my struggles in this world that I'm in now, this isn't the world that I started in, but for the last 12 years or so in Oxfordshire, I've been in this space, and part of my journey has been sort of helping people shift from that sort of corporate social responsibility, let's do a bit in the community, through to genuinely embedding this stuff in every way they operate. And I think Farmability is a good example where Blenheim Palace here, are supporting them, but in a really deep and wide way, in a way that's led. So one of the challenges, so Farmability is a charity that supports adults with learning difficulties and significant learning difficulties, probably people that wouldn't get proper work, but they do need meaningful work experience, and they struggle sometimes to be able to place them. Blenheim took a couple of their co-farmers, and it worked really well, and they since went on and they actually put in some funding applications for a program, and they've now got a bit of an operational unit at Blenheim that's doing some good stuff within Blenheim. The staff absolutely love it. Obviously the supporters of Blenheim love it as well, and it's great for the co-farmers. The co-farmers again experience that they wouldn't do otherwise.
Yeah. Seems to be a win-win. So obviously the government have just brought in, well, they haven't brought in, but they've changed the legislation a little for January, where they're now saying that public sector procurement must include social value as an automatic rather than a consideration to social value. I appreciate fully that you've just made the differential that there's a difference between organisations doing things on the side and just playing at it. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but doing a small amount, and what you've been talking about up till now. But do you think that sort of move, and to a certain extent COP26, which happens next year, is it 25, 26, I can't remember, COP that's happening in Glasgow, do you think that will start pushing more in the public sector? And we've seen this bounce back, this green bounce back the government are talking about. Do you think that push will start making the private sector think differently, which pushes the public sector, and you get this cyclical move in the right direction as far as you're concerned?
It's a really good point, Kath, honestly, and it's interesting because I think in my heart I'd love to see businesses do this because it's the right thing to do, but you're right, sometimes you need the market to help you, and I don't have a problem with that. It's interesting really because what we're talking about in terms of what's changing is there've been sort of shifts and iterations. This stuff goes back to 2012 actually, so it's probably about the time that I set up my business. So we had the Social Value Act that was introduced then, and as you point out, the Social Value Act obligates anyone spending public money to consider the social value that's added through that work. So, and it's a great tool, and I think a lot of the local authorities and others who perhaps didn't understand it considered it to be a bit of a pain and an obligation rather than an opportunity. And I think that's the thing, is that there's less public sector money around, and if public sector contracts can actually encourage and leverage private contractors to do more, that's got to be a good thing. And I think what we have seen people embrace it, and what's really interesting, the big contractors have shifted and moved. I went to a social value conference a good few years ago now, and one of the large contractors actually at the plenary sort of threw the gauntlet down and said, we're not being asked enough of when we're contracting, we can deliver more social value. And I think, I don't know, obviously we're not sure exactly who's listening to us, but I think the important thing, one of the challenges is often businesses, I mean in Oxfordshire where we're sitting here, we've got 33,000 businesses. Most of them aren't those big contractors, and most of them perhaps feel that doesn't apply to me. The important thing about this is those bigger contractors want to demonstrate how they're adding social value. So their supply chain is going to have questions asked of them as well. I'm talking too much again, but yeah. You're absolutely right. That's going to have a big shift.
But I think you're right though, Grant. That's the big challenge for me, because there is a massive difference between the private sector when you're a large organization or if you're an SME. For a large organization to join the 5% club and say that 5% of their workforce will be apprentices, therefore by adding into social value, it's very difficult if you're a small business to make the same statement, because 5% when you've only got a few people is a huge impact, and it's not necessarily a full person's job, for example, or you are spending quite a lot of time supporting that apprentice, where in the larger organisation, it's almost part of the noise in the background. So there is a big difference, and that for me is one of the challenges, because at the same time that the government agenda is quite rightly moving towards sustainability, environmental, social value, there's also fairly obviously a drive to reduce costs because of where we are with COVID. There is a drive to equal up SMEs and larger organisations so that they're on a level playing field, and that government per se can benefit from buying from the man in his garage who's got a brilliant idea. So it's quite a challenge to make sure that these organisations have some equality. But the guys that you were talking about, particularly the social enterprises we've got in the city, they're quite small enterprises, aren't they? And yet they've set up with this drive that says, actually, I can make a big difference. And I think that the founder of TAP that we were talking about earlier, what a great position to be in, that you say, actually, I can see that I can make a difference to the problem here. I keep seeing the problem and I can cut into that problem. And I think that's a really good position to be in.
I absolutely agree, and I'd say a few things about that. I mean, TAP is a good example. Whenever you mention it to anyone that knows them, they all think they're fantastic. I mean, ridiculously, they were broken into about a year or so ago. The way the business community sort of came and supported them was incredible. I won't go into details, but I know the sort of support that they've had from the business community because people want to support them. So I think that's something I'd say as well. But I think going back, the other thing, I'm not sure if it's part of the same change in legislation, but the government is also shifting to commit to spending more money with SMEs as well. And I think that's another reason why SMEs. Exactly, and SMEs, the more they can demonstrate that they're adding social value, the more attractive they'll be. And to speak to that point that you made before about how difficult it is, I honestly understand that. I mean, I run a small business myself, so I do understand it. But I think this is where the exciting part comes in, because if you were to look, and I would say B Corp is only one model. There are other ways of doing it, but if you look at the B Corp model, there's loads and loads of things that you can do commercially, just in terms of the sort of the way that you're buying, the questions you're asking of your supply chain, taking on ex-offenders, or providing opportunities for other people. There are, you can tailor the sort of ways in which you want to add social value that fits the business. And what I would also say again is, here I am locally. I got a call, well, it's a couple of years ago now, but a printing company got in touch with me and said, we've got a customer who wants us to do more business with social enterprises. What's a social enterprise and can you help? And that was actually Johnson & Johnson, who make those requests from people in the supply chain. So I think it's a good example of, if you're a SME and you're not aware of this, or you don't think it applies to you, it will.
And of course, we've been talking about, we used apprenticeships as an example, and I'm just going to expand on that a little bit, because obviously that also brings into the equality and diversity agenda. Making sure that different types of people within your business, which actually helps and improves your business as well. So there's the people piece of this whole section, which we focused on. But there's also more than just the people part for a true social enterprise, isn't there? There's that feedback into the environment, there's that sustainability piece. Can you talk a little bit to that for us, the types of things that people are getting involved in there?
Definitely. Before I do, actually, just go into the people piece, something I'll share with you as well is, when I was an employer, I've looked at more CVs than I care to remember. And I remember, okay, it's going back a few years, but I remember looking for slight chinks and what I would call flaws. And the likes of ex-offenders or people that have been homeless or had drug and alcohol issues, not that it's on the CV, but if you had any flavour of that, I would immediately dismiss them. I'd probably also be looking for people that were like myself as well, because I understood them, which was exactly the wrong thing to do. But what I would say is, being in this world, I've learned that sort of people that Tap Social or Aspire or Sophia, who we work with locally, have been supporting back to the workplace. They have got some of the qualities that employers want. They're tenacious, they're creative, they're resilient, they're loyal. They've got all of those things, and so employers, if they were to look at that, could get a. And the other thing I'd say about diversity as well, you know, I used to think of that. I think a lot of people think of it as gender and ethnicity, perhaps. Yeah, no, and honestly, some of the organisations supporting perhaps people that are on the autistic spectrum, you know, Johnson & Johnson, as an example, use a company, I think they're called Auticon, I'm not sure, but they're a social enterprise that support people with autism because they're really good at doing that IT stuff. And money spent with them is supporting that cohort, but also providing great services. So that was on the people bit. On the other stuff, I mean, so you want to give us an example of something that we can expand on then? Do you mean on the community side of things, or
so again, in work that we've done with the public sector, when we've talked about social value and the types of things that they might include in scoring, you know, the biggest challenges for most procurement officers is to do this balance between what actually does the organisation want, what does the local authority want. So they might well want more people going back into the workplace, so apprenticeships would be good for them. But equally, they might want something else, and they really struggle to say what that something else is. That sounds rather strange from a local authority, but it's often the case. You know, they're procuring a thing, and they don't want to think about the other things around it. But that makes it quite difficult for the people bidding into that bid to actually say, well, this is what we can do for you. So, you know, the obvious things are, in buildings, it's easy because you can make sure that you protect an endangered species, or you can look after nesting birds, etc. And I don't mean to be disparaging about any of those things, but that becomes a little bit more straightforward because it's obvious in a facilities management contract. But in some type of service contract, and a lot of the businesses in our county are service contracts, the differential between them and the next person when they're being asked to add social value is difficult, because a lot of them are going, well, I don't know what to add. So what sorts of things would you recommend that a business would add apart from the people piece, which we've talked to?
So I'm not going to be able to answer that question in just this short space of time. But what I would say is I'll give you a couple of examples, but I would say that has been a big issue, and it's interesting. You know, if you talk, anyone watching this, if you want to go to Social Value UK or Social Value Portal, they'll help with some tools that can look at that sort of thing. I think really what I would say though, Kath, is that it's a difficult topic, because sometimes you're working with them. Sometimes people will leave it to the supplier to say, what social value are you going to add? And they'll be going, what would be good? And I've had people come to me. In fact, I've helped people that are saying, I'm bidding for that contract. If we get it, can you help me in terms of understanding what projects are going on that we can engage with? I think there's not enough conversations going on the ground in those areas with the sorts of people that they could support to find out what's needed, rather than what either, as good as some of them are doing, the local authority thinks it wants, or left to a contractor. So it's no magic answer, Kath. I'd say it's an area that I think needs to be improved. But you're right, it could be anything from apprenticeships. It could be the ways in which people are going to employ people that have been disadvantaged and are ready to get back into the workforce. It could be supporting community organisations. It definitely could be the environmental side of things. I think also, really importantly, it's about that supply chain increasingly. I think if we can use the supply chains more, so asking more questions of the people that are supplying you, then that will help as well.
Well, interestingly, we had one of the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, Matt Barber, talk with us recently about anti-slavery, and obviously that also is a supply chain issue, and just checking that people are actually doing what they should be doing, rather than what they economically feel that they could be doing and can get away with. So, you know, I think that's a big area. So a lot of these problems, and you know, they're all interlinked, aren't they? They have, you know, a very close connection with each other, I think.
And I think this is what I love about the space that I'm in. So I sort of see myself as sitting at, whilst I've got a private business, if you like, but I see myself sitting in the middle. So, you know, I'll have conversations. So I sit on in Oxford here, the Economic Growth Steering Board. And so that's around the economic development of Oxford City. You know, I talk to the LEP. I'm delivering some programs with the LEP. So we've got the local enterprise partnerships. We've got the councils. The public sector's got less money. The strategy here, we're talking a lot more. Everybody else is talking about a more inclusive economy. Well, what does that mean, and how can we do that? the private sector, and I mean, this has been happening for a while now. It's none of it is new, but there's been a movement, and it's definitely been accelerated through the pandemic. And I mean, you talked about B4 before. If you look at that B4 network and how that shifted, and everyone's talking about this sort of stuff now. So to get back to your point, you've got private sector, the voluntary sector can be less dependent upon grants. It needs to stop just asking for money and find out ways it can have really mutually beneficial relationships. So you've got voluntary sector organisations, social enterprises, public sector, central government. We're having conversations with central government. They want to make this stuff happen more as well. And businesses who want to do more, and people want to work for businesses like this. They want to buy from businesses like this, and increasingly they want to invest in businesses like this.
And I think, and I hate to say it, but you and I are probably at the wrong end of the age spectrum here, because the younger generation are absolutely driven by organisations that think like and work like in this area. You know, it is their driving area. Anything that's sustainable, anything that's people focused. And I suspect with coming out of COVID, then, you know, more and more people will have recalibrated, that's a strange phrase, but, you know, recalibrated their thinking in this space, and therefore hopefully, you know, we have a different type of life once we leave COVID to the one that we came in with. Grant, as always, I could talk to you forever. I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you so much.
No, thanks for the opportunity.
No, really interesting. Thank you. Next week, guys, we're moving in a completely different direction. We're joined by a very good friend of mine, Dr. Peter Caddick-Adams, who's going to come and talk to us about staff rides and all things training delivery, and why you might choose to use military history when you're teaching about leadership. I'm really hoping that he remembers, because he's really bad at remembering, that he's got a coffee and chat next week. In the meantime, thank you again, Grant, and hopefully catch up with you soon at the tap. Speak soon. Take care now.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Bye.